Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog and join the Progressive Army.
Welcome, ladies, gentlemen, and gender nonconforming individuals to another episode of the Benjamin Dixon Show. Today is Friday, September 1st, 2023. Thank you so much for joining me. Florida is still recovering in the aftermath of Hurricane Idalia, which hit the shores of the west coast of Florida at a Category 3 level, leaving hundreds of thousands without power, homes devastated, businesses leveled, and when viewed in light of the ongoing wildfires that are all around this country, particularly in Maui, President Biden weighed in and declared that there's no way that anyone can deny the impact of climate disaster at this point.
I don't think anybody can deny the impact of the climate crisis anymore. Just look around. Historic floods, more intense droughts, extreme heat, significant wildfires have caused significant damage like we've never seen before, not only throughout the Hawaiian Islands in the United States, but in Canada and other parts of the world. We've never seen this much fire.
And in fact, all around the country, we are seeing not only record-breaking fires. We saw the first hurricane to hit the coast of California in 80 years. And with the fact that Hurricane Idalia picked up steam at the last second because of the increased ocean temperatures that is a direct result of climate change. And in the aftermath of Hurricane Idalia, President Biden has announced that he will be in the state of Florida Saturday, September 2nd, to view the devastation as well as bring assistance to the state and Florida Governor Ron DeSantis.
I am going to Florida. I'm going to Florida Saturday morning.
Amongst other issues that the president will be facing when he comes to the state of Florida will be the continued aftermath of the Dollar General shooting by 21-year-old racist terrorist Ryan Palmetto, who drove to Edward Waters University and then to Dollar General and took the lives of 52-year-old Angela Michelle Carr, who was a mother working for Uber at the time. Arnault Laguerre Jr., 19-year-old young man who took a job at Dollar General to make some extra coins, and Gerald Deshaun Gallion, 29-year-old father who was in the store with his girlfriend. The city of Jacksonville is still reeling in that aftermath. President Joe Biden had the following to say in a statement with regard to that racist shooting. He said, quote, "Even as we continue searching for answers, we must say clearly and forcefully that white supremacy has no place in America. We must refuse to live in a country where black families going to the store or black students going to school live in fear of being gunned down because of the color of their skin. Hate must have no safe harbor. Silence is complicity, and we must not remain silent." Reverend Al Sharpton and a coalition of black leaders also met with President Biden, calling for a summit to address the exact type of violence that we saw demonstrated in Jacksonville just last week.
We have an eerie memory that as much hope as we represent, there's always going to be those that will keep hate alive. We said to the president that we, along with many of our civil rights organizations, Anti-Defamation League with Jonathan, who is here with us, National Urban League, National Action Network, all of us put together a hate crime summit here at the White House. It's time for number 2, and we want to do it in Jacksonville, Florida. And we told the president we want to go to Jacksonville with a hate summit as the second one. We told the president that we want to deal with those businesses that made all of these commitments after George Floyd and did not keep those
promises. That last word was cut off, but there are so many companies that benefited from the label of Black Lives Matter and the protests in the aftermath of the killing of George Floyd that did not keep their promises. And we are living in the reaction to the Black Lives Matter movement. Quite honestly, we're still living in the reaction to the civil rights movement. What we see happening around this country with the increased amount of right-wing terror being brought by young, white, conservative men is a direct result of an ongoing campaign to fuel a race war in this country. We'll discuss that a bit more later in today's episode, but it is critical for us to understand the context of the violence that we saw in Jacksonville, Florida. The kind of violence that let this 21-year-old loser, according to the description given by his father on the 911 call, this failure of a human being who decided to take out his hatred on 52-year-old Angela Michelle Carr, who was driving for Uber. The racist terrorist Ryan Palmetto shot her while she was on the job waiting for her next trip, her next Uber trip. Her pastor, Angela Michelle Carr's pastor, Reverend David W. Green, who is the senior pastor at St. Stephen AME, had this to say about his beloved member.
The family was raised in this church. She was just a loving, caring mother who brought her child to church.
A loving, caring mother who was targeted because of her skin color while she was at work trying to provide a living for her family, killed in a racist terrorist attack that is slowly moving away from the headlines because of the nature of our news cycle. And I believe that it's incumbent upon us, all of us, everyone, but especially black people, especially black leaders, to not allow this country to erase what just happened, because it's significant. It is a significant moment, not just in the history of Jacksonville, Florida, but in the history of this country, because it is yet another example of what right-wing terrorism can do. This young man, whatever he was suffering from in terms of mental health issues, he was also suffering from racism. And it's because of that he targeted Gerald Gallion, whose 2-year-old daughter is still trying to come to terms with the fact that he's gone. Listen to the grandmother's description of how this young man loved his daughter.
The last time she talked to her father was Friday night, 2 o'clock in the morning while he was at work. And he stayed on the phone on FaceTime until she dozed off to sleep.
A working man on the job, reaching out to look and spend time with his daughter over FaceTime. And as he went in the next day to just pick up a couple of items, he ran into this racist terrorist. And, you know, at the risk of allowing the narrative that this is a mental health issue to be promulgated, there are questions as to why this man, who had previously been Baker Acted, was allowed to legally purchase a firearm in the state of Florida.
After he had exhibited mental health issues, how did he get a gun?
Well, he got a gun because the NRA has such a chokehold on this country that even a young man who has demonstrated suicidal tendencies, who has been previously Baker Acted, was able to get a gun. And while Republicans like to always make gun shootings, mass shootings, an issue of mental health issues, Republican administrations always seem to make it easier for them to buy weapons. And again, this is not an issue of mental health. This is an issue of racism, because he was a cold, calculated murderer who picked the exact date 5 years after a previous shooting in the city of Jacksonville, who indicated that he wanted to kill black people. So yes, mental health concerns are an issue when the Republican administrations make it easier for them to get weapons, yes. But in this case, the core problem was white supremacy being the root motivator. He blamed his lot in life on black people, and he took that violence out on us. And this is not just a one-off incident. All right, when we come back, I'll be discussing what's going on in North Carolina, where a black justice on the Supreme Court is being investigated for talking about systemic racism. You heard me right. More of the Benjamin Dixon Show right after this.
I'm in sync with the earth, 10 toes deep, flower child from the turf. I never switch sides, like even when I die, I'm a ride for the squad, ladder ties in the hearse. I've been on a vibe, kinda hard to describe. I'm in between, I'm good and it's fine, but I'm tired of the grind. Then I come alive in the night to realize I'm in the middle of the time of my life. I'm never so packed for the stack, never lied on the rap, got a bag from the way that I write it. Queen looking Tyson, who that ass to
The Benjamin Dixon Show. Visit us online at thebenjamindixonshow.com.
Welcome back. Coming up after the patron party, I will be discussing Justice Anita Earls, who is under threat because of an investigation into her speaking about racial biases. They are threatening to oust her from the court, not for private vacations or trips on private jets, 28 trips on private jets like Clarence Thomas. Nope. But for speaking out about racial biases. We'll discuss that in a moment. I want to play for you a clip of Georgia Governor Brian Kemp, who is shutting down the possibility of an investigation into Fani Willis. Now, I don't give Brian Kemp much credit for anything because he actively participated in stealing the 2018 election by disenfranchising the 2018 gubernatorial election in Georgia, by disenfranchising tens of thousands of black people. That is documented. So I don't have a lot of positive things to say about Georgia Governor Brian Kemp. However, in this case, he is allowing the indictment and the trial of Donald Trump to go forward without any interference, even though Republicans in the state of Georgia are calling for an investigation into Fani Willis.
There have been calls by one individual in the General Assembly and echoed outside of these walls by the former president for a special session that would ignore current Georgia law and directly interfere with the proceedings of a separate but equal branch of government. Up to this point, I have not seen any evidence that D.A. Willis's actions or lack thereof warrant action by the Prosecuting Attorney Oversight Commission.
Now, the individual he's speaking of is State Representative Colton Moore, who represents the 53rd District of Georgia. He called on Brian Kemp to call for a special session so that there could be an investigation into Fani Willis. Donald Trump, for his part, chimed in giving significant support to Colton's Moore request that they investigate the investigator.
Highly respected Georgia State Senator Colton Moore deserves thanks and congratulations of everyone for having the courage and conviction to fight the radical left lunatics who are so badly hurting the great state of Georgia and, frankly, the USA itself. Failed DA Fani Willis, who has allowed Atlanta and Fulton County to become a record-setting murder and violent crime war zone with almost no retribution for those murderers, shockingly indicted your favorite president, me, for a perfect phone call. She is very bad for America. She is very bad for Georgia.
You know, the irony is that Fani Willis is absolutely great for the United States of America. And whether or not she's good for Georgia, I will leave that to the residents of Georgia who have brought up concerns about some prosecutions from Fani Willis. But there's no doubt that when he says she's bad for Georgia, Donald Trump is just saying that she's bad for him because she had the nerve to actually hold him accountable. And there's nothing more that he hates than a black woman trying to hold him accountable. I mean, this entire system is fracturing because there are black people who are willing to hold Donald Trump accountable. Black people and Jack Smith. I can't count out Jack Smith. Jack Smith is definitely doing his job on the federal level. These two federal indictments. Judge Tanya Chutkan, the Jamaican American, the black woman who is doing her part to help defend democracy. Donald Trump and all of his sycophants have attacked her, both in a racist fashion and in a misogynistic fashion. They're always willing to engage on that level. But for his part, at least Brian Kemp said that he's going to stand out of the way of this investigation. Now, I want to emphasize that this is not Brian Kemp being noble. This is Brian Kemp doing his part to try to help rid the Republican establishment of the disease that is MAGAism, the virus that is Donald Trump. There are some Republicans who I believe mean no good for the rest of America. I don't think Brian Kemp means any more good for America than Donald Trump. I don't think they mean any better, have any better intentions for black people, for women, for Muslims, for any of the marginalized communities. Brian Kemp's intentions are no better than Donald Trump's. But the Republican establishment has decided that they want to part ways with Donald Trump. And in this instance, they can part ways with Donald Trump simply by doing the right thing, which is allowing the investigation to go forward. Here's more from Georgia Governor Brian Kemp.
The bottom line is that in the state of Georgia, as long as I'm governor, we're going to follow the law and the Constitution, regardless of who it helps or harms politically. And in Georgia, we will not be engaging in political theater that only inflames the emotions of the moment. We will do what is right. We will uphold our oaths as public servants. And it's my belief that our state will be better off for it.
This is a fascinating moment. We're getting ready to go to break, but this is fascinating where the Republican Party, who honestly does not mean anything good by working people, right? Brian Kemp doesn't mean anything good by the average Georgian, but it is a fascinating moment because they can do the right thing and come out on top, at least the Republican establishment. They can do the right thing, which is to not interfere in this legal process. Donald Trump violated the law. He needs to be held accountable, but they can just simply take a step back and help purge the Republican Party of MAGAism, of Trumpism, all by doing the right thing. It's a rare occurrence that the Republicans will choose to do the right thing. But in this case, doing the right thing is actually beneficial. It is a material benefit for the Republican establishment. That's why they're doing their best. Brian Kemp, for example, doing his best to get rid of Donald Trump. All right, when we come back, we have to discuss what's going on in North Carolina, where a black judge on the Supreme Court is being investigated because she referenced racial bias in the justice system. That is not hyperbole. This is yet another example of the war on woke that is happening all around this country. More of the Benjamin Dixon Show right after this.
Go to www.patreon.com/The BPD Show and get twice the content and unfiltered interviews without any of the commercial interruptions. Welcome back to The Benjamin Dixon Show. Visit us online at thebenjamindixonshow.com.
Welcome back. Welcome back. Justice Anita Earls is the only black woman on the North Carolina Supreme Court, and she has publicly addressed issues of racial bias within her own court, which is not groundbreaking or revolutionary to say that the justice system of every state in this country has racial biases. However, that statement has landed her in trouble. There is an ethics investigation going on because she highlighted the lack of racial diversity amongst the court's clerks and disparities in treatment of certain attorneys, particularly a black woman. Her comments were in response to a study revealing a lack of diversity amongst lawyers arguing at the high court. So in other words, she's referencing the reality that when cases come before the high court, there is a difference in how black women attorneys are treated. Now, I'm still failing to see the controversy, but the Ethics Commission in North Carolina, which is packed with Republicans, they are targeting Justice Earls for being outspoken about racial bias. So the mere fact that she's speaking out about this has landed her under an investigation by the Republican-backed Ethics Commission in the state of North Carolina. Now, I need you to pause and just really take in consideration what this means. That means that no matter how high up your position is, she is a justice on the North Carolina Supreme Court. She is now being hit with an ethics investigation for merely discussing racial biases on the court. in the judicial system of North Carolina as well. The treatment of black attorneys, particularly black women attorneys who appear before the court, addressing those systemic issues. And again, to be clear, she wasn't just addressing them to talk about them. She was speaking about an actual study that empirically demonstrated the very racial biases that she was speaking of. And so she cannot, according to the Ethics Commission, this Republican-backed Ethics Commission, she cannot discuss these findings, this empirical study, because it somehow shows that she believes the court is impartial. Well, if the shoe fits, wear it. Better yet, if the shoe fits, change it. But instead of changing the reality of the systemic biases, the racial biases on the court, in the judicial system, the so-called Ethics Commission is now investigating her with the potential of removing her from office. Well, for her part, Justice Earls has filed a lawsuit in federal court asserting that the investigation infringes on her First Amendment right to free speech. I would agree. But ultimately, what's happening in North Carolina is the same thing that's happening in the state of Florida because of Ron DeSantis, which is why it is so insulting that he was invited to Jacksonville in the first place, because Ron DeSantis is waging a war on woke, which is a war on blackness. We see this happening all over the country, and it's because attacking the idea of diversity, attacking the idea of inclusion, attacking the idea of a multicultural society has become the entire brand of the conservative movement. They do not want diversity. They do not want inclusion. They certainly don't want a black woman on the Supreme Court talking about racial biases, because if you get a black woman on the Supreme Court of North Carolina talking about racial biases, that means you probably have a black woman on the federal bench who is willing to hold Donald Trump accountable. Right? It is the nerve of black people to become full participants in this system, which means that we have an expectation that this system is going to be fair. That assumption, that expectation is now coming under attack by white people, white conservatives specifically, white Christian conservatives no less, who declare that diversity is not our strength, who believe that they are the most oppressed people in the country. I know I've played this clip twice in the last 2 episodes, but I'm going to play it again because I need people to really understand that even in the midst of this war on woke, even in the midst of this attack on Justice Anita Earls in North Carolina, the attack that we see happening on Fani Willis in Georgia, the attack that we see being levied against Judge Tanya Chutkan, they are all connected to this white replacement theory, this white aggrievement, this idea that white men are under attack and they are the most oppressed people in this country. This attack that's happening on Justice Anita Earls in North Carolina is as much connected to this ideology that's being forwarded to white conservatives as it is connected to the mass shooter in Jacksonville.
I will stand by this as much as I possibly can, and I will be the loudest voice. The actually worst thing to be in this society, if one thing I would not want to be, is a straight white male. Yep. For some reason, that's considered problematic, right? And it's really staggering to think that once upon a time, that is exactly what the experience was for a black American, that being a black American was so problematic that you weren't going to be allowed into the room. Now you have the exact same thing happening reverse, and you have liberals trying to convince you that that's equality. Yeah. It's not.
That is the source of the war on woke. They're able to get away with it because you have black people who are complicit with it, like Candace Owens, but a lot more. There's a lot more black people who have been recruited in order to get high-ranking positions. I would not be surprised if they got rid of Justice Earls and then replaced her with another black person, but this black person probably has a picture of Donald Trump on their phone, right? That's what's happening all around the country. There are black people who are complicit with this thinking, this grievance complex, complex. But at the core of this white supremacist push, at the core of the right-wing violence that we see this fear that is being placed in the hearts of white men, particularly from the shooter in Jacksonville all the way to this ethics commission. They believe that diversity is the problem. They believe that anyone who's discussing racism, they are the problem. If you talk about biases, you've got to go. That is the war on woke. File this next story underneath. Elon Musk was never a free speech absolutist. He was never concerned about free speech because now a Saudi Arabia man who used his platform, used Twitter or X or whatever you want to call it, he used that platform to criticize Saudi Arabia for their human rights violations, and now that man is facing the death penalty. Now, why should this matter to Elon Musk? Not only because the former teacher, the retired teacher, Mohammed bin Nasser al-Ghamdi, is being put to death because these posts were put on Twitter, these posts criticizing the human rights violations of Saudi Arabia. Elon Musk should not just be concerned because, well, a man is dying because his platform, but he should also be concerned because Saudi Arabia is one of the primary investors into his purchase. His $44 billion purchase of Twitter would not have happened unless he got major dollars from Saudi Arabia. And so now Elon Musk, who says that he purchased Twitter because he was concerned about free speech, has been completely silent about the man being put to death because his business partners didn't like his Twitter post. That's the reality. A few more details. Al-Ghamdi, the retired teacher, had a very small following on Twitter online with only 9 followers. 9 followers. His brother, who is in exile, expressed concerns that the sentence was given as retaliation against him, suggesting that Saudi Arabia intelligence may have targeted him. So, yeah, he's being put to death for sharing a social media post on Twitter to his 9 followers. Saudi Arabia said, nope, he's got to go. And they are using their investment into Twitter as a means of getting that data and now having nothing but complete silence from Elon Musk, who said he purchased Twitter to protect free speech. You know, there's no wonder in the aftermath of Elon Musk purchasing Twitter that the use of the N-word shot up by 500%. That's what he considers protecting free speech, not protecting the life of a man who's being targeted by his business partners because he criticized them. Free speech for Elon Musk is your ability, well, not you, the black people listening to me, but the white folks listening to me, your right to get on Twitter and call us monkeys and to use racist language and to post racist memes. That's protected. That's free speech, but not the ability to criticize your government if that government is a business partner with Elon Musk. All right, coming up in today's Patrons Only episode, Mississippi Governor Tate Reeves is under fire because of text messages showing coordination with Brett Favre, former retired NFL quarterback Brett Favre, over the welfare funds that he got. Dollars that were supposed to go to the poor, to people who needed assistance, went to Brett Favre's daughter's volleyball gymnasium at the University of Southern Mississippi. We'll discuss those text messages. Also, coming up in the Patrons Only episode, listen to the violence that is being promoted by the far right in this country.
I'm so tired of talking about it. It's time that we do something about it. I do know that there was a precedent set by the people who liberated this country by making tremendous sacrifices, including their own blood and guts spilled all over the ground. I do know that there is a heart and a soul and a heartbeat of this country that was founded under God by Christians who made those sacrifices. And until we prove that we are ready to make sacrifices of equal proportion, we should not consider ourselves to be entitled to inherit the country that they liberated.
Yeah, that's right-wing host Stu Peters calling for violence in his thinly veiled way. There are a lot of right-wing Christians in this country working themselves into a frenzy to commit acts of violence, just like we saw in Jacksonville this past week. We'll be discussing that in the patrons only episode, patreon.com/the BPD show. If not, I will see you next week.
The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.patreon.com/the BPD show and support The Benjamin Dixon Show. If you like this episode, be sure to share, like, and subscribe.